of Town Planners in person of Town Planner Olubenga Oladimeji Ashiru. Sir, what are the major problems of urban settlement in Nigeria and how can we achieve reasonable urban control?
Like I said initially, the first problem is inadequate planning. Now, when I say inadequate planning, I mean that government has a role to play, individual has a role to play. Now, what is your contribution as an individual to the environment? Are we relying on government? I was at a particular part of the city yesterday, and the drainage is full of refuse. Now, those refuse don't come from heaven. It's about human activity.
It's man-made.
It's man-made. We are responsible for it. We dump those things believing that it's government. When you drop just a piece of paper on the road, you are dropping it for who? Who are you waiting for to come and clean it? So it's a big problem in terms of managing the urban settlement because it has to be inclusive. It is very important that it is inclusive. That's number one. Number two is that no part of the land should be used without planning. Planning in the sense that this land is meant for this use. This is the kind of zoning that this land is meant for in terms of commercial, residential, industrial. We have some beautiful parts of it in urban centers like Abeokuta, for example. We have the Ilesha, Pan. We have industries. We can easily see that our commercial activities dive towards Shapmon, Itoku. Then we can see our residential is towards Kolobo. Then we can see our institution is around. So that is planning, managing the land uses so that there won't be conflict in land uses.
Okay, and let's look at the Land Use Decree, which stipulates that all land belongs to the government. How does this relate to the use of land for commercial activities?
When we talk about land use decree, the first thing is why was this law in place in the first place? Why do we have it's not decree, it is act. Why do we have this act in the first place in 1978? Why do we have it? We have it because government has a lot of problem with provision of infrastructure and facility. For example, you want to construct a stadium and then you have to talk about 70 or money less before you could construct a stadium for the people to use. Before you want to build an hospital, you have to negotiate with Omonile, who might even continue to raise the stake and say, no, they are not going to give out the land. So there is a big problem about government being able to do what is expected of government on land, because we know all development has to be on land. If the decree is not there, we might even have a situation whereby somebody will say a road cannot take this way. So the Land Use Act is stated clearly that when there is overriding public interest, it's there. Government can acquire any part of the land so far it is for overriding public interest. Who is the public? It's still the same people. And there are provisions for people who want, you have seen a lot of village decision, when you have a genuine cases presented before the government agency in charge of land, you can be exempted from being acquired. But Land Use Act has come to stay. The only thing we should be asked for is a review of some of those laws that doesn't match the current trend of development. But I can say that assuming government is not in charge of land, then there will be a lot of issue. And that's why we have so many people killing themselves over land then. But when government comes in and take over the ownership of the land, those conflicts stops.
Now let us take a look at the roles of the Omonile, the land speculators.
Yeah.
Would you say that their roles is just like a threat to land acquisition in Nigeria, or they have their own contributory roles to the success of acquiring lands in our dear country, Nigeria?
Omonile depends on the definition we give it.
Because
all of us,
when you hear Omonile, what comes to mind is illegal occupants, illegal people that sell land to maybe 2-3 persons, or maybe a plot of land to about 5 persons at the same time, or who would just want to flex muscle say.
That is why I appreciate the Ogun State government that has a law in place against the Land and Grabbers Act that stop these land speculators and then the so-called Omonile. Mind you, all of us are Omonile, but now depends on the definition we are giving. The negative Omonile, let me use that word, that tends to sell land and grab land and then sell for 3, 4, 5 people are not doing any economic good because they discourage development. They discourage the pace of development because a developer now needs to settle 3, 4, 5 people before he can actually make use of his land, which might not be part of his budget. Now, the forceful entrance to land, to claim lands not owned by them, is an act that has to be stopped. And that's why I said I appreciate the Ogun State government for that law alone, because it has since stopped the problem of Omonile. The problem I think that we are facing on Omonile issue also can be solved with what I call synergy, whereby the government agencies could call. So whoever it says is the owner of land or claiming lands, ownership of land, for compensation while acquisition takes place, so that we won't be having this problem of land grabbers all over the place. But I think Ogun State has been able to achieve a lot, and then the thing has drastically reduced in this part of the country.
Let us now look at some of the self-inflicted problems that we bring upon ourselves, some errors. Now, when we see siting or filling stations within residential areas and gas selling points, even outlets within some residential areas, do you want to say that they actually got the right permission to do that from the government quarters before going ahead to erect such a business venture within the residential areas?
I will answer this from 2 angles. The first one is, when we see residential around a filling station, the question is that, are those residential approved? Let's look at the filling station first. Then we now ask, is that filling station approved? Now, some of those filling stations are actually sited at the outskirts initially. And then you now see people now building towards it. So some have their approval for that filling station, but the residential uses around it are illegal. So one needs to consider that as well. Now, when you now see some filling stations in the built-up environment, it's not all that are approved. It's not all that has the permit. It's not all that are legal. And some that are approved might have what we call mitigating measures, that what they need to do to operate. For example, when we talk about gas, it's a thing that we can't take away from our daily needs now. But what tonnage is approved? What are those mitigating measures ask the gas operator to put in place in case of any negative incident? So some of these development can actually cohabit with residential uses, but with some mitigating measures. But it is not all that is legal, and it's not all that is illegal.
Mitigative measures by Town Planner Ashiru Olugbenga Oladimeji. If you just tuned in, the program is Matters Arising on OGBC 90.5 FM. So gradually, as we're coasting home on this edition of the program, would you say, or would you want to subscribe to the fact that land is a good investment in Nigeria?
If proper measures are put in place, land is a good thing.
What are the measures that are to be put in place?
1, lands appreciate in value over time. That's the only thing, that when you buy today, the next minute it's appreciating in value. But you don't buy a land and just leave it there. You must put it into use. Now the use is now, it could be just fencing, it could be documentation. That means having your plan, converting it to a loan until you are ready for what you want. But you don't just buy a land and leave it and say it's an investment. That is land speculation. It's no more investment. You want to sell, so you are now buying it that, okay, in future it will appreciate in value. Then I will say that means you don't actually need that development at that land at that time, and it's not encouraging because it leads to leapfrogging development. You have a development, you have a big value, a big bush around, and you now have another. No, it doesn't work that way. If you are buying a land for a future use, there must be a present use as well.
Okay, then what is meant by sustainable land management?
Sustainable land management means, that's where I'm coming from now.
Okay.
You don't just buy a land and leave it without putting it to use. If the original use the owner of the land has in mind is an event center, and you don't have the money to develop it now, and the banks are not helping you now, or you are not helping yourself, that you could now make it a green. Event center could come in so many forms. You could make it a green, and then the best use of that land is what you should. It's not all land that are good for all uses.
All uses.
No, it's not all land that are good for all uses. No, a land that is good for residential should be used for residential. Consult the expert on it. The land that is good for commercial should be used for commercial.
And for farming as well?
The one that is good for farming, you should know it shouldn't be in the built environment. You should have to go to the countryside. You should have to go to the outskirts, to the rural areas, and then so you can have enough land to play with. But if you want to have a cassava plantation inside the Bara GRA, then it won't work.
OGBC 90.5 FM gradually. What is meant by land use planning, and what are the problems?
Now, land use planning is the specific use a land is put into or proposed for after considering so many factors. And those factors could include the soil nature, the accessibility, the planning, radius. That is, what do we have in that radius? So, and it is designed by town planners, putting into consideration other professionals in the built environment. So, land use planning is to make sure that there's a lot of synergy in the use of land. A place where you work is not too far from where you live is not too far from where you buy your things, and then making sure that the land is put to its best use. That's what land use planning is all about. Before
I let you go, what are the available types of land? You may want to talk about that.
Available type of land. Now, there are some you buy from government agencies. You approach the Bureau of Lands and Survey, and they will tell you. There are some you buy from OPIC, Overseas Property and Investment Corporation. There are some you buy from the housing corporations. They have their site and services. And there are some you buy from the so-called traditional rulers. I don't want to use some money like who are the custodians of the lands they have that they want to sell. And there are some ones that you buy in the real estate markets, whereby you approach some of these estates that are genuine, and then they sell lands to you. So it depends on the one you want and who you are approaching, but make sure that you buy it from the right source.
Finally, in a few seconds, your parting shot on the show.
Before you invest in land property, you should be ready, and you should be sure that you know why you need that land, and make sure you do the right thing. And I believe that land is a good investment, and we have a special attachment to land, not because it's appreciated value, but I believe because all of us eventually end up in land.
Land is definitely a good investment, and with that, we draw the curtains on this week's edition of our Current Affairs program, Matters Arising on OGBC 90.5 FM. Special thanks to our guest on this show, Town Planner Olugbenga Oladimeji Ashiru, the first Assistant National Secretary at the Nigerian Institute of Town Planners. Thank you so much for your time on the show.
Thank you very much.
We cannot but acknowledge the input of the producer of this program, Benga Oshindele, ably supported by Wahid Ogunjobi, not leaving out the sound manager, Femi Shola Oniyide. My name is Tebi Tokwe Babalola. Let's do it together at exactly 2:30 next week Tuesday. Please do have a good time.
Thank you, my brother. I appreciate you so much. Much down there.
It makes sense, sir. It makes sense, sir.